There are a few key dates you can point to when chronicling the boomer shooter renaissance of the 2010s. The first would be July 31st, 2013, which saw the release of Rise of the Triads Remake, for better or worse. The next would come on May 13th, 2016, with the release of the Doom reboot from id Software that reignited mainstream interest in single-player shooters. The final significant date is December 10th, 2018, which is when Dusk released and fully kickstarted the current onslaught of boomer shooters we have in the indie space. There is one other important release that happened in 2018 though, and it's very pertinent to this review. Being set forth upon the world on October 18th, 2018, Project Warlock was birthed by Jacob Sislow, who was then only 18 years old. Having programmed the game while he was still in high school, his goal was to recreate the experience he had playing older titles such as Blood, Doom, and Heretic in his youth. His dad let him play games when he was far too young, much like most of our parents. He would eventually gather other developers and artists to bring his vision to life, and the end result was a great throwback to classic boomer shooters that the industry was sorely lacking in at the time. That brings us to Project Warlock 2, which recently hit version 1.0 after nearly 3 years in early access. While a sequel to the previous installment, this game goes for more of a true 3D shooter vibe with verticality, the ability to jump, and much larger arenas with distinct themes. You could call the first game a Wolf-like, but its sequel is anything but. While that's a smart evolution of that original game, the first was a big novelty in 2018. Project Warlock 2 has a lot more competition 7 years later, and it sometimes falls short of the standards set by other genre innovators. The general plot of Project Warlock 2 is connected firmly with the original, but doesn't truly matter in the grand scheme of things. Following the events of the first game, where the unnamed protagonist assumed the devilish throne of Hell, Project Warlock 2 puts the players into the boots of 3 of that character's apprentices, Palmer, Erd, and Kirsten. All of them have reasons for hating their former master, and with a new horde of demons ready to wreak havoc on the world, they feel compelled to thwart their teacher's plans and save humanity. Getting to that point will require lots of shooting, lots of magic casting, and lots of demon killing. It's a formula that has worked for decades now in shooters, and while this game doesn't present anything resembling death with its plot, it doesn't really need to. As a throwback to the 90s, Project Warlock 2 upholds the traditions of Doom, Heretic, and Duke Nukem 3D by keeping its story elements relegated to brief interstitial text scrolls and cutscenes. There isn't a lick of voice acting either, so you can safely ignore any plot if you choose to, and the game isn't hindered for it. I appreciate that, especially when some other classic series are now drifting so far into over-explanation that they become boring as a result. The sequel doesn't tweak much of anything that worked in the first game. Project Warlock 2 is still separated into episodes, though there are only 3 here with 12 levels each. The majority of those are standard levels with linear progression, whereas the midpoint, level 7 in this case, and the final level could be classified as boss fights. Throughout your demon obliterating odyssey, you'll level up your character, find tokens to upgrade your guns, collect stat points for passive upgrades, and acquire magic spells to aid in killing enemies. It's a slight upgrade over the original, with more options available in fights where the odds are almost always constantly against you. You'll apply these upgrades at your home base, which each character visits after completing a level. Certain upgrades are locked off until later in a given episode, but even if you decide to ignore this system, it's not like the upgrades are necessary for completing levels. They act more like modifiers for how you cut through the monsters of hell, with your default guns being perfectly suitable while their upgraded forms often go for overkill versus simple death dealing. Starting character Palmer, for instance, gets access to an assault rifle and a standard shotgun during the first level, but you can modify those to become an LMG and an auto shotgun, for instance. Those upgrades certainly kill better. That was one of the best gimmicks in the original Project Warlock. While the arsenal could be considered limited in the sense that you were only able to carry 9 weapons at a time, the gun selection was technically 38 weapons strong, as there were multiple upgrade paths for those weapons. That is carryover here, with each character having access to 6 distinct weapons that feature 2 upgrades each. That slight reduction cuts down on redundancies and ensures you'll actually utilize all of your guns, even if you don't really need to deal with weapon swapping. The second character, Erd, has access to a revolver magnum that can regain bullets upon headshotting foes. Each upgrade retains this latent ability, but because of how utterly powerful it winds up being, the rest of her arsenal often feels superfluous. When you get thrown into a massive shootout, which happens at regular intervals throughout the levels in an almost serious Sam-like fashion, definitely needs to switch to other firearms. Even still, you wind up sticking with that pistol because of how godlike it is. Each character has a weapon like that too, so at times the combat can become monotonous. That said, I appreciate how Project Warlock 2 handles its different episodes. All three vary in theme dramatically, with the first feeling similar in tone to the original game, but each episode starts you off with a new character who isn't upgraded. It's similar to how Blood 2 handled things, just without all of the jank and awful design decisions. It also helps with explaining why your character would be starting off anew after having taken down some big foe. You have to acquire new upgrades, and since each character has unique weapons, it means the episodes have their own sets and pacing that can often feel lacking in more traditional shooters. This is on top of how expanded the general gameplay is over its predecessor. I mentioned before that Project Warlock 2 bears some resemblance to build engine titles, but that isn't entirely accurate. The speed, scale of levels, and general arsenal are incredibly reminiscent of Duke Nukem 3D, but these levels aren't anywhere near as interactive as build engine games can be. There are a bunch of times when props will get in your sight lines, and you'll often wish that you could just blow them away. I think that's maybe one of the biggest drawbacks here. Environmental props add some detail to the world, but are so static that they can conflict with the flow of battles. At least this time you can jump, so you don't have to stay in eyesight of every enemy. That helps too, as the enemy roster is much more filled out here. Project Warlock felt like it adhered to the Doom archetypes a bit too closely, but Project Warlock 2 brings in foes inspired by a much wider range of FPS baddies. Most of the Doom family is here, with new enemies called Cacobots obviously standing in for Cacodemons, but then you get homages to Quake with the Shamblers, and a copious helping of undead zombies that just love to rush you. The numbers are also ludicrous, though I played the game on its hardest difficulty skill for this review. At times, rooms will be utterly swarmed with foes, and the addition of headshots will help even the odds a bit. As for how the episodes play out, I do think that maybe the pacing is a little off here. This is probably the biggest fault I could find with Project Warlock 2, but the final episode is the shortest of the bunch, and almost feels like an introduction to what you would expect from the game. It's tough thanks to your character's more brittle playstyle, but with the longest level being about 9 minutes, the entire episode is over in roughly 70. Episode 2, on the flip side, has some levels going upwards of half an hour, and battles are just spaced out too much. There were certain moments where I'd kill a massive horde, then not see another enemy until the end of the level some 15 minutes later. That wasn't a result of secret hunting, mind you. Those secrets as well are definitely a bit more emphasized here. In the original Project Warlock, secrets acted more as they did in Wolfenstein 3D, and that you get temporary power-ups to aid you in the current level. This time, secrets will be hiding upgrade tokens, and while you don't necessarily need them to make progress, it does start to feel as if the real fun is being hidden away arbitrarily. For boomer shooters, I've never been of the belief that secrets should be essential to the experience, even if they made up a big part of old school level design. Between levels, you'll have the chance to upgrade different stats for your characters. Until you hit the 7th level, all passive upgrades are locked off. The first 7 levels of an episode wind up feeling tougher than the final set because health simply isn't as plentiful. It's never to the point of frustration, but once you can expand your vitality and then unlock the passive ability to restore health with kills, you'll often find sections where you simply have no means to recover HP. My issue isn't that this makes the game harder in the beginning, but more that the difficulty curve is basically reversed. Having said all that, those issues melt away when you're knee-deep in the dead and plowing through everything in sight. I particularly like the third character, Kirsten's ability to give herself a soul bargain, where she can respawn upon death after retrieving enough health from foes. Her character in particular feels like playing the game on a mega difficulty because of how much emphasis is put on rushing into big battles and deploying decoys and magic. From an ability standpoint, I understand how the characters flow naturally and mimic the player's own growing skill, but the level design doesn't play to the strengths of each character well. There is a solution, however. Once you complete the campaign the first time, which kind of ends on a whimper with no true final boss, you unlock Realm Shift mode. As you may have guessed from that name, this allows you to play any episode with any character. And a nice bonus as well, you can unlock both upgrades for each gun and carry them at the same time, expanding your arsenal to 12 weapons. I believe XP and upgrades also carry over per character in this mode, so once you tackle the next episode, you'll be even more ludicrously overpowered. In this mode, you can also play the game in my recommended order of episode 3, then 1, then 2. Maybe it's not the most substantial extra, but I appreciate that each character isn't locked to their episode for perpetuity. Other than that, Project Warlock 2 doesn't have any multiplayer or any kind of challenge arenas. I don't personally care about that stuff, but it's something to note for people who might. Co-op would have been great, but the game provides enough entertainment to feel worth a purchase. The thing is, this overall package is more a sum of its parts kind of thing. It's not as if Project Warlock 2 is entirely bug-free, for instance. I fell through the world at one point and wasn't sure if that was an intended effect. At other times, killing enemies with certain weapons during closed-off arenas wouldn't end the rush, meaning I'd need to reload a checkpoint to continue. I encountered performance issues as well, which is kind of bizarre when my computer has an RTX 3080. There's also the aforementioned lack of a true final boss, with the third episode ending as if it's business as usual. In some ways, this game feels a little unfinished, but any type of disappointment I have is simply because the boomer shooter pool has become so large in the last 7 years. For me, Dusk still stands as the best of the retro shooter revival games currently available. Some of that is down to nostalgia, while another is because of its specific design quirks. The original Project Warlock is also still a unique and complete experience after all this time. Project Warlock 2, however, isn't quite as polished, doesn't feel 100% finished, and is basically more of what we've been getting in droves for years now. Boomer shooters are thankfully back in fashion, but you can't just repeat the same trick and expect the same results. I mentioned on social media right after beating the game that I do believe Project Warlock 2 is overall better than its predecessor, but expectations are a bitch. With how good games such as Turbo Overkill, Prot, and even Postal Brain Damaged are, Project Warlock 2 just has more to live up to now. Even still, the sequel is of a high enough quality to be worth consideration if you love boomer shooters.